dear members of the Diplomatic Club of Geneva and dear members of the Société des membres de la Légion d'honneur, once again, it's a big pleasure for me to welcome you to this online exclusive dialogue with Alexandre de Juniac, outgoing Director General and CEO of IATA, the International Air Transport Association, on the thrilling topic, how aviation will survive the COVID-19 crisis. Throughout his career, Alexandre de Juniac has proven to be a formidable leader in the aviation industry with decades of experience, including as CEO of Air France and later Air France KLM. He has spearheaded IATA through some key moments in the industry's development. His last year as CEO of IATA was not a smooth one, to say the least, with the COVID-19 crisis that had an unprecedented impact on the global airline industry. I think the question we are asking tonight, how aviation will survive this crisis, is very accurate, and we are looking forward to have your answer, dear Alexandre de Juniac. The discussion will be moderated by our friend, the journalist Kasmira Jefford of Geneva Solution, which is a new digital platform dedicated to covering international Geneva issues. For the smooth running of the event, I invite you all participants to ask your question using the Q&A icon on your Zoom conference system. I wish you all a very interesting event. Many thanks also to the Société des membres de la Légion d'honneur and its president, Nicolas Frison de la Motte, for co-organizing this event with us. And Nicolas, at the end of the event, will make some closing remarks. So, Alexander, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Raymond, and thank you, Nicolas, for inviting me for this webinar. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I will be brief in my introductory remarks to leave time for your questions. And before going directly to answering the question that Raymond has just formulated, I would like to make a quick reminder of a few key basics on aviation. Why do I want to do that? Is because you probably know everything about aviation except the essential. And the essential is that aviation is a very, very difficult and fragile industry. And that's not obvious. It's not obvious because, first of all, it looks glamorous. And when I had the honor to be appointed as the CEO and chairman of Air France and Air France KLM, you know, I received thousands of letters of congratulations. I was very proud and very happy. 2 weeks after, I understood that there was a lot of irony in these letters because the sector is difficult. Why is it the case? And why is it not known? First of all, we manipulate big numbers. We transport pre-COVID, we transported 4.5 billion passengers. We were earning almost $900 billion of revenues. We were operating 42 million flights over the planet and almost 17 million jobs directly and indirectly depend on us. So that's big numbers. But we are very fragile and it's a very tough sector. First of all, it's highly competitive. If everyone remembers, we have invented for the best and the worst, the low-cost business that has been invented in aviation. Secondly, we are a low profitability industry. When we make 3–4% of profit, that's, you know, it's Christmas. We open champagne, or probably it's too expensive for us. It's only for the premier class, first class passengers. We are also capital intensive industry. So it needs enormous amount of investment every year to buy planes, basically. So we have unstable balance sheets. We are a labor-intensive industry with, let's say, strong rigidity, so fixed cost, strong unions, not always very cooperative. We have monopolistic suppliers, believe it or not. Our suppliers are, of course, competing with each other, but they're not very numerous. And we have an enormous exposure to all risk. The geopolitical risk, let's remember September 11, in which during a few days, the industry was completely blocked. We are exposed to weather conditions. We are exposed to natural disasters. You remember the volcano, the Finnish volcano. You remember perhaps the Fukushima crisis, so industrial disasters. And we are, of course, exposed to pandemias. And the COVID is a good illustration of that. But before we had the SARS, we had the H1N1, we had the MERS, we had Ebola. So it's not totally unknown in our industry, even if this crisis is in an order of magnitude that has been unknown, unprecedented. We are fragile, very fragile. It's a tough industry, but it has been tremendously successful. But the number of passengers is the first illustration, almost 5 billion before COVID, growing 5% a year for now the past 70 years. We have a regular and sustainable growth, and which is accelerated particularly in developed countries, China, India. In other words, everywhere in the world, when anyone reaches the purchasing power to buy a ticket, they buy a ticket. It's almost the first dream of everyone is to travel. And in terms of safety, this industry has been, incredibly successful. We are the most safe, the safest transportation mean on the planet, perhaps just behind the elevators. But that's already tremendous success. And what we bring, I don't want to be arrogant, but we are convinced that we bring at least three things. First of all, it's economic and social development by introducing connectivity. When you think about the success of, recent success of connected states, such as Singapore, such as the Gulf states, such as less recently, but very clearly, such as the Netherlands, you understand that their economic and social development is basically grounded in the level of connectivity, and we participate in that. Of course, second point, we bring cultural and personal openness, exchanges, which is absolutely key. And I used to say that we are one of the business of freedom. We bring freedom in addition to prosperity and progress. So when I talk about aviation, I should be not only happy, even if it's difficult, optimistic, but this crisis has been a disaster, a complete disaster, a devastation. It has devastated this industry financially. Our losses will reach $120 billion in the world. We accumulate all the losses of all airlines in the world. The traffic is down for international traffic by 85 to 87%. And as a whole, if you accumulate domestic and international, the traffic is at 2/3 of the 2019 levels. So it's as if we would have cut 2/3 of our revenues, simply. The only good news for us was the cargo. The cargo has done pretty well, even if we should not forget that the demand has been down by 8% in 2020 compared to 2019, but the prices were sustained, and then the cargo business has been pretty good, and it has, as you know, heavily participated into fighting the COVID-19 and distributing the vaccine and allocating, the drugs, the medical equipment, doctors, etc. So it's a key contributor to the fight against the pandemic. But the crisis is clearly a devastation, unprecedented. Never we have had such a crisis, hitting our industry. So how people feel in front of this crisis. We have done some research. We are regularly questioning and surveying something like 5,000 people all over the world in 11 countries in all continents. It shows that 68% of these people believe that not being able to travel has negatively impacted their quality of life. Half have said they have been unable to see family, friends, they feel a loss of freedom, 40% feeling stresses, 40% missing a key human moment, wedding, funerals, family events. So it's a key element, and a lot of people also say that it impacts negatively their professional life, not only their personal life. Why is this situation so difficult? It is because mainly states all over the world have put in place travel restrictions. They have closed their borders, or they have put, almost similar restrictions that are quarantines or restrictions for entry, restrictions to entry. So it has blocked completely international traffic, slightly less domestic traffic. We will come back to that in a few seconds. So the COVID has put an end to international traffic. In a way, it has put an end into human globalization, which I think it's a major step back in the evolution of our planet. And when we look at the COVID-19 strategies that have, inspired all the restrictive measures all over the world, you see two categories of strategies. In Asia, including Australia and New Zealand, Asia Pacific, you have basically a zero COVID strategies. So governments aiming at, eliminating COVID. As a counterpart, all the borders are closed and pretty difficult to reopen. And you have the other strategies, basically in the rest of the world, America, Europe, Africa, Gulf state, that are more based on kind of stop and go, in which we fight against COVID and then we release measures and fight again. And for these category of state, which has not been successful in reducing COVID, the hope lies in vaccination. So two strategies, one which is successful against COVID, but very difficult to stop in terms of reopening borders and restarting international travel. The other one, which has been much less successful, but which is more compatible with a reopening of borders. But then at which condition? What we think is that we will need a combination of testing and vaccination, I repeat, testing and vaccination to restart international traffic and international flights. So it will be probably and unfortunately not coordinated all over the world as the traffic restriction has been previously. That has been the discovery for us, the complete lack of coordination between states, a complete disorder in the way these measures have been taken, implemented, modified, and it's a complete nightmare, not only for us, the airlines, but also for the passengers. Nobody knows every day if he can and at which condition he will be able or allowed to travel from country A to country B. That is a major problem. And what we think is that if we want to restart this industry, we should have a global approach, coordinated approach between states or between group of states to implement a testing and a vaccination strategy, and probably a testing and vaccination control process to allow the traffic to start again. So that's the key point. What it means is that it's key affirmation that we will live with COVID, but that we will control COVID thanks to testing and to vaccine. So it's risk-based approach, very common in aviation. So we are not surprised. We are trying to convince government with our strategy. It is, of course, not easily compatible with the zero COVID strategies adopted in the, let's say, eastern part of the world. Another point, and my last point, is how will be the industry after this crisis. I think there will be three characteristics. First of all, the industry will have probably the same structure with low-cost airlines and full-service or legacy airlines. There are two markets that will both survive. Sometimes the low-cost are in a better shape. It's the case in Europe, but it's not the case in Asia. Sometimes the legacy carriers are in better shape. That's the case in North America, for instance. But the two will continue to survive and to compete. Second point, you will have an industry that will be more nationalistic. First of all, because the border control that have been implemented will be difficult to release totally. And secondly, states have invested or injected something like $200 billion in our industry, $200 billion to save this industry, to have the lifeline, the rescue line for this industry. They have done that successfully. We are very grateful that they did it. But as a counterpart, they have intervened massively in this industry, particularly in either nationalizing or increasing their stake in their carriers, in their national carriers. So the role of states will be probably much higher in the near future than it was. Thirdly, we will see probably a recovery in traffic between 2023 and 2025. 2023 for the travel, for personal reasons, we are pretty optimistic. People want to fly. They are not afraid. They want to fly, and they are ready to accept all the testing, vaccination, control processes, certification processes, digital app to certify. They are ready for that. And we know that in China, the domestic traffic is at the 2019 level. In the US, it is recovering very, very fast. So we are pretty optimistic that it will come back. For the business travel, it will come back later in 2025, because you have all these tools we are using today, for instance, the Zoom and the Teams of this planet that are competing with us. But we are sure that even if they will take their share, when someone will have to develop its business, to meet new people, to invest in new activities, it cannot be done without meeting, without physical presence. So travel will come back, and events will come back as well, which is a big trigger for professional travel. So I will just like to conclude and to let you on one note of optimism. We will fly again. We will fly safely, and we will be able to travel and to meet our beloved one again and to develop our business as we did before, but it will take time. Thank you for your attention, and I give the floor to Kasmira.
Thank you very much, Alexandre Juniac, for those words and for leaving us with an optimistic message, at least for the future, but also with some quite staggering figures really there. I remember when we spoke exactly a year ago, I think at that point, the aviation industry was estimating losses of around 70 billion. And here we are today with $120 billion of losses for 2020, and who knows what those will be for this year. But I wanted to dig in first. We'll look at some of those issues that you raised, but first I wanted to talk about this point about testing, which you brought up and which you highlighted as being really key to getting the aviation industry back on its feet again, and obviously also limiting the spread of COVID. And you talked about this kind of disorganized approach that we're seeing at the moment. I mean, what is the situation today with testing? Is it fair to call it confusing and frankly quite inefficient? And how can we get different governments to work together on this and resolve the situation there?
You're right to say that the testing strategies that have been implemented by governments is confusing. That's a very diplomatic word, and we are in the diplomatic club. That's perfect, but it's a complete mess, if I may. Everybody is doing things in complete disorder. You're using different tests, using different kind of tests. It took us 4 or 5 months to convince many governments to implement a testing strategy, not to speak about having a coherent, a consistent strategy between states. Because, you know, at first we had to convince governments that they will have to live with COVID. And so it means that they have to accept a level of risk that is under a certain threshold. This threshold being probably the limit above which they do not control the pandemic, and below which they control the pandemic. But you know, to have this acceptance from government has been difficult. We have asked for a systematic testing strategy beginning of September. Do you believe that? We are 6 months, 7 months after the beginning of September, and the testing processes that are in place all over the world are completely disconnected, uncoordinated. But we should achieve that, because we think that the combination of testing and vaccination is the key element to have a safe travel and a very effective limitation of virus transmission between countries. That's the key point.
I mean, one of the issues is around the cost of these tests and who should be bearing responsibility for the cost of those tests as well. What's your view on that?
You know, the PCR tests is pretty expensive. When it's something around $150, $170 or euros or Swiss francs, all is similar. So it means that when you have a family of 4 and you have to do two PCR tests, it represents something like almost 1,000 francs back and forth. It's more than the price of the plane ticket usually. So testing price is much higher than very often the price of the ticket. First of all. Second, that the reason why we are strongly pushed to use antigen tests, but we know that there are some reluctance or reservation regarding, you know, the sensitivity, the efficiency of these tests. But you know, they cost $6 to $8. It's completely different in terms of cost. But the key issue there is to convince everybody. And what is interesting, that passengers are convinced. 85% of passengers we have surveyed, they're asking for to be tested. They say tests should be normal process in our journey. That's an interesting point. But then we should apply a similar testing system and to reduce cost of tests.
And we've got a lot of questions to get through, so just moving on to that, you mentioned that it's both testing and vaccination, of course, and now with COVID, vaccination strategies well underway. I think there are some almost 800 million vaccine doses that have been administered to date in the world, and hopes that some countries will be at 75% of their populations vaccinated by the October this year, thereabouts. But still a long way to go. I mean, there's been increasing talk of vaccination passports too, with many governments looking at making this a condition of entry. I mean, what's your view about this? Should and will vaccination be mandatory for the aviation industry?
Alors, first of all, we have never asked for vaccination to be mandatory, never, because we think that it creates big problems. Especially for those who cannot be vaccinated for medical reason, or do not want to be vaccinated for any other reasons, first of all. So, but what we think will be quasi-mandatory is a combination of testing and vaccine. Because we understand that from the point of view of many states, it's absolutely key to have a flow of entering passengers that are not infected, or in which the risk of infections is so low that it is not creating a risk for their nation or for their population. So it will be probably a combination between testing and a vaccination. And for that, we have developed a tool. We are not the only one, but we have developed a tool which is called IATA Travel Pass. It's an app that you will be able to download on your smartphone, and that will certify that you have been tested and or vaccinated, when, in which condition, etc., and that you will be able, under your control, your personal control. It will not be stored in a big database, the Big Brother database. Not at all. It will be stored only in your smartphone, your personal data, and you will be able to transfer this data to those who are requesting them. Governments, airlines, if they impose that to fly or to enter into that territory.
Doesn't that pose some similar problems as to the vaccination, this idea of vaccine passports, if this tool is available, even if it's you storing this personal information, that you could be asked this on entry, and that could create some unethical, potentially problems of inequity going forward?
No, but we are conscious of the questions that are raised by these type of processes, but we must also be conscious of the need for states who have successfully fought against COVID, and who want to protect the population, that they request a level of risk for entering passengers that is below a certain threshold, and you can reach this level of risk, which is low, only by showing a test or showing a vaccine. We understand the problem, but we shouldn't be totally naive. I think a lot of states in our world will request something like that, and probably a mandatory vaccination, whether we like it or not. Then it will be a personal choice to see whether or not you want to go to visit this state or this territory. But we shouldn't be totally naive about that. And the issue there is to choose between being totally restricted from your freedom to go wherever you want, and not being vaccinated, or being vaccinated or tested and being able to travel everywhere. That's the dilemma.
So you mentioned in your introduction these two different categories of strategies: this zero COVID approach and this more stop-start approach that other countries have adopted. I mean, how do we reconcile these two different approaches in one, and especially now that we're seeing all these new variants crop up now? Vaccines this year was meant to be, and testing was meant to be, the magic formula to hopefully seeing these border restrictions loosen, but we're seeing them tighten again. So yeah.
But for the moment, it's very difficult to reconcile. As I told you, the zero COVID strategies have been effective. In many Asian countries, you have zero or almost zero case, close to zero case. But in terms of, is it possible to reopen borders? For the moment, none of these states have been able to reopen borders successfully. So it's difficult to reconcile the two.
And can we see more of these corridors, these bubbles that we've seen open up between certain countries?
That's an interesting point, because the first bubble that was prepared was between Hong Kong and Singapore. It was due to start in last November. So it was a bubble, just to explain, a corridor between two countries in which the two countries agree, to welcome the passenger of the other country with an implemented process of testing, vaccination, whatever. But this bubble has been delayed twice because in Hong Kong we saw some surge of the pandemic coming back in November and in February. So it shows how difficult it is to reopen borders when you have a zero COVID strategy. Very, very difficult.
So bubbles burst there, as it were, but
it can work. Sorry, just I don't want to interrupt you to be too long, but it can work between countries that have the same level of infection.
We're seeing at the moment, I mean, could we talk about the UK for a second? Because they're quite a good example. They've had this travel roadmap, and we've seen them being kind of the first mover in this, in trying to lift restrictions and get travel going again. The kind of, I guess, the issue with this being the first mover, you're always going to be the first one making mistakes and having this trial and error approach. But so far, what do you make of their reopening strategy as a potential model for other countries looking at them?
But I would say what we have asked countries to do now. We started at the beginning of February, is to set up an opening plan that was consistent with their vaccination strategy or their anti-COVID strategy. So it was to say to states, now that you have vaccine, you have a vaccination plan, vaccination strategy, you should be able to have an opening plan for your economy and consequently for your borders, for travel, etc. This request has not been totally successful, to be blunt, because the only state which has issued a consistent plan, a reopening plan, is the UK. So the UK has done very well, but it has been very difficult to convince other states to do the same.
How about in the US? I mean, you mentioned that there we're seeing they're speeding ahead with their vaccination strategy, and you mentioned domestic markets, domestic flights being the first among the first.
But what we see in the US is a pretty dynamic vaccination strategy, similar to the UK, and so they have a reasonable hope that by the beginning of July, the proportion of population that will be vaccinated is above a threshold that gives them some certainty or security that things are under control. And so all the airlines are planning to reopen their borders, to reopen their flights, and we think that the US will probably, with the UK, be among the first to open international travel over the Atlantic. So it should work. It should work, but as you see, it is a reopening plan which should be consistent with the vaccination strategy, but we are asking states to implement.
So, I mean, the message is we will fly again at some point. Perhaps you've also been looking and browsing online for potential summer holiday destinations, but we've had some figures come through for summer bookings, and what we're seeing, if we look at those figures, it is indicative of the demand there is for travel out there. And I mean, so far, what are those numbers telling us? Or should we be prepared for a spate of cancellations once again?
we should always be prepared to have potential cancellation. That's not that's impossible. But we are pretty optimistic that when you look at the result of the vaccine, even against the variants, it's not always perfect, but it's still pretty good. We think that we should see a reopening and a pretty strong recovery. There is an enormous appetite to fly. We have had some examples when we reopened corridors. It was a few months ago between the UK and the Canary Islands. The bookings, soared incredibly. So people, they are eager to fly. They want to travel. But just question the people around you, your friends, family. They want to fly again, to travel again, to take a flight. And for that, they are ready to accept all the testing, vaccination, certification, IATA travel pass, and all that stuff, and QR codes, and blah blah blah, because they want. It's a basic freedom. We must be convinced that we are the support of a basic freedom, and a key one.
I am going to canter through some more questions since this hour is whizzing by. And you mentioned in your introduction that the low-cost carriers are, they have the best chance of survival here. We're probably going to see them kind of bouncing back first.
In Europe, huh?
In Europe?
In Europe, more. In Asia, they have been in trouble. I will tell you why, but please, sorry to have interrupted you.
No, and then you said also that, business travel, that will come back later. But, I mean, where does this leave mid-priced airlines that rely on these short-haul business class, first-class passenger flights like Air France, KLM, which you know well? I mean, will we need to see a fundamental rethink there of their business model, and can they adapt to survive?
The low cost, more generally, those who will be able to survive this crisis properly are those who were pretty strong at the beginning of the crisis. In Europe, to give that example, the low cost were pretty strong financially. They had a strong balance sheet. They were more profitable than usually the legacy carriers, and they only depend on the short and mid-haul network. They do not depend on long haul. Whereas the legacy carriers, the German Lufthansa, the French Air France, or the British Airways, they rely heavily on their long haul, and long haul has disappeared. If you remember, the international traffic has dropped by 85 to 90%. So you have no long haul in the sky. You have probably noted that the sky is totally blue without long haul. White smokes in the air. So the low cost will recover more quickly, and as they were financially stronger, they have survived the crisis better. That was true in Europe. In Asia, the low costs were more fragile. Their financial situation was difficult, and so they are in a big trouble. And the legacy carriers were stronger. They have been also heavily supported by the government, as in Europe, and so they are surviving better. And in the US, it's a mixed situation, but it's true for both that have received government funds by them. So you will still have, after the crisis, low cost business strong, and legacy carriers, and both of them will continue to develop their activities, because there are two market segments for that: the price sensitive one, and those who are more sensitive to service, quality of service, level of service. So that's an important one. And the long haul is mainly dominated by the legacy carriers. One thing we have, which is a result of this crisis, is that the long haul low cost has disappeared at this stage, because long haul has disappeared.
Which we saw with Norwegian, for example, that
exactly. But we have noted also that the financial situation of Norwegian was already difficult, so they haven't survived, or they have had much more trouble to survive the crisis than their low-cost competitors in Europe. Interesting point. But the initial situation was weaker, financial situation was weaker than the others.
And so going back, you mentioned some $200 billion in dollars in financial relief then for a lot of these carriers. And just earlier this month, we saw a €4 billion state aid package agreed for Air France. Are these bailouts the right move, and will they damage competition in the future? And if we look back to the era before deregulation happened, are we going to see this return to set high fares that we had then before the low-cost carriers?
I know for that we are totally clear. We have asked government to intervene massively and to inject massively some enormous amount of money in our industry. We are grateful. They have done a fantastic job. They have been fast. They have done that massively and quickly. And congratulations and thank you for that to government. And I can tell you, I don't know if it will harm competition in the future, but if governments had let the airlines disappear, that would have harmed competition much more than supporting them, because you would have had so many bankruptcies, so many airlines disappearing, that you would have had no competition at all. So I think it has been better for competition, even if I know that many people are worried that it could, introduce distortion in the future. But at present, I can tell you, thanks to government intervention, they have done a fantastic job.
So moving on to other challenges that the airline industry faced, even before COVID, and that's adapting to climate change and curbing its carbon footprint. I mean, how can the industry best use this period of change that it's going through to also reset how it addresses environmental challenges, and how has COVID impacted the progress it's making in making this green transition?
I'm sorry, but the communication was not very good. I couldn't catch the question. Sorry for that.
No problem. I will repeat. So I was asking about. I wanted to talk about the impact of COVID on the transition the industry was already having to make to a greener future. Okay.
So on the environment, on the environment and CO2 emissions and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as you know, perhaps everybody is not aware of what this industry has already done, because 12 years ago, when nobody was interested or invested at the level we are now in environment, this industry committed to reduce the CO2 emission by half in 2050. We committed 12 years ago to reduce our emission by half in 2050, and that including the traffic growth. First of all, we committed to reduce our emission per passenger, and for the between 2010 and 2020, and we did it successfully. We are even beyond that. We committed to be carbon neutral starting in 2020 until 2040, and we have convinced 190 governments to implement a worldwide regulation system to impose to our industry to compensate our CO2 emission by a mandatory buying of carbon credit. So this industry has done a fantastic job. Nobody knows that, and I would like all the people attending that webinar to know what we have done. We think in this industry that we could go one step further. We are thinking about that. We will probably announce something beyond that in the coming months. I will not be in charge, but I think it will be done because we are convinced that it is a key issue for us. And the COVID crisis has not changed anything in the commitment we made, and it has even reinforced our strong conviction that we had to go one step further and probably to aim at carbon neutrality in the future, which is an enormous you must imagine how enormous this effort is from an economic point of view, and even more from a scientific and technical point of view. It means enormous progress in science, in technology. It's a fantastic challenge. It will be done. When we commit, we do. But it's not a done deal yet. Huh?
No, and I'd love to ask you more about that, but with just 15 minutes left, I'm just going to take a couple of these questions that come through on the chat as well.
Yep.
We haven't spoken at all about safety, and Arnaud Brunetta, attaché à la défense pour le gouvernement français, he asks, pilots, air traffic controllers and technicians will have had a very low activity during this period. What set of measures will be taken to make sure that safety is ensured when traffic will return to normal?
Alors, first of all, what we have done during the COVID crisis, because many pilot technicians that are licensed or certified couldn't exercise their activity, or they couldn't renew their certification of their license because they couldn't fly or they couldn't work in the maintenance area, etc. What we have done is we have agreed within the International Civil Aviation Organization to maintain their license, to extend their license, but up to a point, always up to a point in which safety is not compromised. There is no compromise on safety. So we have done that, and we are monitoring very closely with all the specialists, all the airlines, all the safety agencies, governments, civil aviation. We are monitoring the situation to, first of all, to ensure that the personnel that is working is still properly trained, qualified, etc., and licensed, and that the future personnel that will be rehired, instilled into the activity when the recovery will be back, is at the right level. So that is something, that's an issue, a critical issue. That's a very important question that we are following and monitoring very, very closely. So don't worry about safety. You must know that it's our obsession. When you are appointed in an airline, whether it's you are the CEO or the guy in the ramp, doing luggage, or a new flight attendant, or an experienced pilot, safety is obsessional. We are safety maniacs. Okay?
Top of your CV, safety OCD. So a few more questions here. One from Ruben in Jikian. Apologies if I pronounced your name incorrectly. Professor at Webster University. Do you expect new producers of planes to enter the civil aviation market apart from Boeing and Airbus, in particular in China, Russia, Canada, and Brazil? And how important is our government's support to plane producers?
It is true that currently the structure of the industry is dominated by Airbus and Boeing. They have respectively bought, the civil aircraft of Bombardier, that's for Canadian, that's been bought by Airbus. There is an agreement that is now I think suspended between the Embraer, the Brazilians, and Boeing. So the industry was going towards a kind of complete duopoly. And then you have the Chinese and the Russian industry trying, to develop new aircraft. Those who are the most advanced are the Chinese with the COMAC, short and middle aircraft, that has been for the moment only ordered by Chinese airlines, and that is not certified yet from on an international standpoint. So they could enter into this. Newcomers can enter into this business, but you must know that the entry barriers are very, very, very high, and they are both technological and therefore financial, economic, etc. Because the cost of developing an aircraft, it's no less than $10 to $15 billion to develop an aircraft. Nobody has successfully developed an aircraft for less. Never. Many people have tried, and the second barrier is the certification barrier. So, i.e., the safety one.
Next question from a private question. What are your expectations for the return of higher margin business travel now that companies have used Zoom and other systems for a whole year? So we spoke a little bit about this. You did say that you expect to see a return in business travel in a couple of years, but what's going to be the impact of this type of conversation that we're having here?
We think that business travel will come back, but later than the, let's say, personal travel. Probably we will reach the 2019 figures by 2 years or 18 months after the personal travel figures. So probably around 2025, 2026. So 2 years after the recovery for the personal travel, which should take place in 2023, 2024, and it will come back. Perhaps it will be less active and dynamic, but I think it will come back pretty fast as well, because when you develop new, it's possible. In other words, when you run an existing business with existing people that you know already, you can do that by Zoom or Teams or whatever properly, even if it's supposed that well, those who you are talking to. When you develop new business, when you invest in new activities, when you buy companies, it's impossible to do that. To do that through electronics, you have to meet the people. You have to visit the factories. You have to see how the retail network is organized. It cannot be done electronically. I'm sorry for that. Business travel will come back. And another trigger that will come back are events. People, they are keen to meeting physically. They are keen to have these conferences in which the network, in which they meet, in which they say hello to each other. And that cannot be done through these electronic systems. Not the same way.
That's definitely something we rely on. I mean, Geneva as a hub for these kind of events will be looking to that return of business travel here. Just one more question then, quick fire question from Kihan Sultanoglu, UN representative to Geneva, who asks about the timeline for the IATA travel pass that you mentioned.
Oh yeah, that's a very good question. We have tested, the travel pass between Singapore and London with Singapore Airlines in February and March, and we are deploying the IATA travel pass now this week. So it will be deployed between now and beginning of July, with new release coming, including more and more versions. The last element we have to include in the travel pass are vaccination, because we have to convince, it will be done, I think, governments to have a common vaccination certificate.
So
hopefully under the umbrella of WHO.
Okay, so we should watch the space for that coming soon. Now you'll probably be looking forward to putting some of these questions behind you, and with that in mind, what's next for you? Where can we expect to see you?
Well, it's a bit early. It's a bit early to tell. For the moment, I'm still working for IATA as an advisor, and I try to do my best to help this industry that is in a difficult situation. And
so Willie Walsh is now sitting, probably, I'm not sure I would say comfortably, because it's a challenging role, but sitting in your chair behind your desk. What kind of last messages did you leave for him? Were there any notes that you left on his desk with some tips for taking over the helm of IATA?
Well, he is a very experienced and very highly regarded leader, so I have no advice to give him, except use and rely on IATA. We have done a fantastic job in this crisis. We have done a fantastic job before, but in this crisis, no industry on this planet has been organized, has been defended, pushed, helped by its professional organization, by its trade association, as aviation has been by IATA. The people have done a fantastic job. We have been in advance at every stage. biosafety measure in May, last May, then systematic testing in September, now recovery plan consistent with vaccination in February. Do you believe that? I think we can be proud of what IATA has done, and I think that we should will rely on that and continue and will develop that. You know, aviation is the business of freedom. Never forget that.
And IATA's been, Geneva's been your home here for 5 years. IATA is amidst lots of different organizations here. I mean, what were the benefits for the aviation body being based here in this wider international community?
So the fact that we are very close to many international bodies is absolutely key. We are working with a lot of UN agencies or international bodies that are based in Geneva. So it's very easy, you know, to be neighbors, you know, to work well with the WTO, with the telecommunication agency, with the WHO, with a lot of international organizations are working. We are working with them, and that's a key element for us. And we hope the Geneva airport will restart soon, international flights.
We'll be looking forward to that when it does. And it's just to finish off then, just to say a big thank you for taking the time today. I'm sure everyone who's listened in on this call has really enjoyed listening to you and some of these insights, and also a reminder of how difficult and fragile the aviation industry is, but at the same time, hopefully resilient to make a comeback when borders reopen properly again. And want to wish you the best of luck for your steps going forward. And now I'd like to hand over to Nicolas Frison de la Motte, who will make some closing remarks. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kasmira. And I will now switch to French for a few words and to address to our French-speaking friends attending. 2 remarks. Il aura suffi d'un minuscule virus pour clouer des milliers d'avions au sol, ce qui démontre notre grande vulnérabilité. Comment anticiper ces situations, sinon en mettant le paquet sur la recherche et le développement de vaccins à large spectre et de médicaments efficaces. Deuxièmement, l'avion fait et fera toujours rêver, n'en déplaise à certains écologistes. Par contre, voyager est une autre affaire. Le voyageur d'aujourd'hui est un peu comme une sardine qui devrait franchir de multiples obstacles avant d'être mis en boîte. Comment rendre les voyages en avion plus conviviaux et agréables? J'encourage vivement les responsables d'aéroports et de compagnies aériennes à y réfléchir. Pour conclure, j'aimerais remercier Alexandre de Juniac pour sa brillante intervention, le président Loretan, Alizé, Alexandre du Club diplomatique pour leur fidèle appui, et bien entendu Kasmira, Jefford de Geneva Solutions pour son précieux concours. Merci également à tous les participants et en particulier, j'aimerais saluer ici l'amiral Alain Coldefi, qui, président de la SMLH, président de la Société des membres de la Légion d'honneur, qui a suivi le débat depuis Paris. For your information, Bertrand Piccard in May and Jean Todt in June will be our forthcoming guest. Thank you. À bientôt.